Good evening. I'm Daniel Sullivan, author of the Silver Liner series, and tonight I answer your questions. So I'm going to start off with Ellen in Maryland. She's asking via Facebook, where can I buy your books? The answer is, great question, Ellen, by the way. The answer is Amazon.com. You can get my books in paperback or ebook. And if you want to get it in ebook, that is the only option. The other way you can get my books is to order them from me from my website, danielsullivanbooks.com. May take a little bit longer for you to get them, but they'll be signed by me, and that's a nice bonus. So my next question comes from Linda in Maryland via Facebook, and she asks, why sci-fi? Is it challenge or inspiration? I'd say it's a bit of both. Science fiction is challenging because you can do so much with it. So you really have to, if you're writing a science fiction story, you have to have your setting defined and you have to have those details in place. So it can be challenging, but it's also very inspiring. You can do things in science fiction that I don't really feel that you can do in any other setting. And at the same time in science fiction, you can tell what would be considered traditional stories. You could do a romance, you could do an action adventure, you can do social commentary, you can do all kinds of things, coming of age stories. So, and if you look at, like, for example, Star Wars has all of these elements in it. You have social commentary, you have coming of age, you have romance, you have action and adventure, you have a redemption arc of a character. So you can do practically anything with science fiction. You can have space wizards dueling with lightsabers like Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone, or you can also have, in science fiction, you can have political drama, you can even have a starship that goes out for 5 years and just explores because they have the tech to do it, and have all kinds of adventures along the way. So I'd say it's a bit of both. Next question comes from Rusty in Ohio. Every writer has a moment when they said, I'm going to write. What was yours? I'd say it was in 2012, I came up with the idea to seriously write a book. It came out of a goofy conversation with a friend about what would have happened if Elvis Presley had been cast to play Han Solo in Star Wars instead of Harrison Ford. And that was the genesis of Captain Royce in the Silver Liner series. And it was of course, the version of Elvis Presley from the 1968 comeback special where he was still fit and in shape, the height of his powers, and wearing black leather and moving like he was, like he just owned everything. His voice was at the very top, and he was still the man. And that, of course, there were a lot of other things that went into that novel. I definitely had a story I wanted to tell. I got very into artificial intelligence and how humans relate to it. I mean, you just have to read the books, and you'll find it all out. So that was really the first time I had decided seriously that I'm going to write and I'm going to publish a book. I'd taken some stabs at it prior to that in years past. There's a whole vampire series that I've written and rewritten like 3 or 4 times because of computer issues that happened back in the 90s, really before there was much of an internet, and there certainly was no cloud. And I had some issues with computers crashing and the kinds of issues you end up with when floppy disks existed. So the next question is from Mary Ellen in Maryland. I have a lot of fans in Maryland. It's my home base. I'm a Maryland native, so a lot of my fan base is here in the old Line State. Mary Ellen asks, for what length of time do you research your topic before you begin to write? Or do you write and then research as the story moves forward? The answer is a bit of both. If I have a topic I'm working on, I want to do the research so ahead of time so that I don't have to go back and redo things because, oh, geez, that was wrong. At the same time, you don't know every idea you're going to have before you start writing. So things have to be researched along the way. With science fiction, it was more the world building aspects that required research ahead of time. And so, and of course, you do research along the way. As far as the length of time, it really just depends on the topic and how much research needs to be done. So I don't have really a set amount of time. Now, a book that I'm working on right now, which takes place in the Silver Liner universe, but about 100 years after the events of the Silver Liner series. I didn't have to do a whole lot of research for that because I had already constructed the world. All I really needed to do was decide how far had things moved technologically and what was where were things politically and socially. So research for that was relatively minimal. So a bit of both. So the next question comes from Kathy in Tennessee. Kathy asks, you write science fiction. What is your favorite fandom, and which two would you combine if you could? My favorite fandom, I have a lot of favorites. A huge fan of Star Trek, Superman. I don't know. I guess you could call Dungeons and Dragons a fandom. I've been a fan of that from, I'd say probably almost since it existed. I'd say the number one has to be Star Wars. It was the thing that came along and blew everyone's mind. I'd never seen anything like it. I was 10 years old when it came out, and seeing Darth Vader walk through that door it was just a mind-blowing experience. Star Wars has literally everything. It pushes all of the sci-fi buttons. You have lightspeed FTL travel, you have hyperspace, you have interplanetary story that takes place all over a galaxy. You have swordsmanship and duels and things like you would have in Lord of the Rings, but then you have the gunfights and the blasters, so it's like gunfights in the Old West. The elements of the Kurosawa films that Lucas worked in. You have romance, you have action, adventure, coming of age, a redemptive arc, twists and turns, all manner of things. Star Wars would have to be it. It was also the first, for me, it was the first fandom, I guess, that came along that wasn't inherited from people older than me. It was something that came about when I was young, and it became a part of me. I think that a lot of people feel that way who are Star Wars fans with the new sequel trilogy. For them, the adventures of Rey and Finn and Poe and the villain Kylo Ren, and that was something that was theirs that they didn't inherit from my generation. So Star Wars has got to be the number one. As far as what fandoms I would like to combine, one of my other favorite fandoms is Mass Effect. Oh, God, Mass Effect is an awesome series. I would love to combine Mass Effect and Star Wars, or Mass Effect and Star Trek. I also would love to combine Star Wars and Star Trek. So, Superman and Star Trek. There's a lot of things you can do with science fiction, and all of those stories are sci-fi based properties, or sci-fi based stories. So I've got one last one, is also from Hale in Maryland, actually via telephone call. So Hale asked me what I think the place of the villain in the story is in terms of, does the villain drive the story forward? A hero is only as good as his villain, or her villain, as the case may be. What would Luke Skywalker have been if the villain hadn't been Darth Vader, or if Darth Vader had been, if the Darth Vader back in '77 was not Dave Prowse with James Earl Jones's voice. I mean, what would Darth Vader have been as a villain? The way that they wrote him, the way that he was portrayed, Darth Vader made the movie, and in many ways steals the show. Often the villain steals the show. What would Tris Pryor without the villain of Kate Winslet? I don't remember her name. I'm sorry, Divergent fans. that was kind of one of the things where I felt that I love the Wonder Woman movie, but the end when they finally revealed Ares, the villain was disappointing. So the villain is kind of vital to the story. Um, so yeah, I think the villain is a very important part of the story, and the more complex the villain, the more interesting both the story, the villain, and the story are. And the hero, of course, is a lot of what informs you about the hero has to do with how he or she or they interact with the villain of the story. So yeah, I'd say the villain's very important. So that's it for tonight. I'm gonna head on off here and start tapping away on the keyboard. Again, my website is danielsullivanbooks.com. Follow me on Facebook. It's also Daniel Sullivan Books on Facebook. Facebook.com/Daniel Sullivan Books on Facebook. I don't normally have to look it up. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, Daniel Sullivan on both of those.